Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Let's get started with today's video. Hello everyone and welcome from the MOBOTIX team here in the US. This is the first in a series of tutorials to help you reach a new level of competence when it comes to configuring any of the MOBOTIX IoT devices. Since this is a new series, there will be changes and improvements along the way, and we would certainly appreciate your input in the comment section below. We purpose to add some fun to these videos, so stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified of new content, and hit that thumbs up button if we deserve it. Let's get started with today's tutorial that we're calling Initial Camera Configuration. What we're going to cover here is what to expect when you first power up and open a camera utilizing a web browser. One simple way to do this is create a small closed network consisting of a PoE switch, a laptop whose IP address is set to match that of the cameras, and then of course the cameras you're wanting to configure. So let's begin by launching a web browser and entering one of the camera IP addresses into the address bar. When hitting the camera for the first time, it'll take you to a factory password change. Decide maybe ahead of time the passwords that you're going to use for the admin login. Check and apply. Click OK. Here we have a camera that has not been configured before. At this point, and that would be my honey walking through the scene there. At this point, go first to the admin menu. It will take you to the quick installation. This is a small utility that would set some base level items. For the first couple times, just read through some of these just to make sure you know what the camera is doing at this point. We always recommend to dismiss the current configuration even if the camera is straight from the factory, just to be sure. Click Next. Here's where you can set that password again. Click Next Page. Choose whether you want to deny public access or allow public access. And again, the description up here tells you what that means. Next page. Decide whether you need integration mode. Here are some of the integration modes currently offered within the camera. We'll leave it off at this point. Select the time zone. So if you're in the US, I suggest using US as opposed to America. We found that the US is more accurate. And then decide what section of the US you're in. We're here in Virginia, so I'll pick US Eastern. Click Next Page. This can be set later on in the admin speaker microphone settings. I'm going to go ahead and enable the microphone here. Next page. Choose if you want the camera to have a unique name as far as the DNS. I'll leave that right now as the factory IP address. Next page. Decide whether you want to configure the IP address manually or let a router pick the address in a DHCP mode. I'll leave that set to DHCP since I have a router. Now, here's one thing to be aware of. If you happen to be doing this in front of someone other than in your company or in front of a customer, be aware that once you hit this final page before you hit Store Configuration, it does show the password that you just entered into the camera, and it happens to be an admin password. So just be aware of that. If you don't want folks to see that, you may want to come through here quickly and hit Store Configuration, or maybe somehow blacking your screen out, what have you. But just be aware that this will be the only time it's going to show you that password. All other times it will be represented by asterisks or dots. So just something to be aware of. I'm going to hit Store Configuration. I've already saved this, So otherwise you would have to put your credentials in here because it wants to know that you're admin level before you restart that camera. I'll hit yes. We're going to hit reboot, and then you can just close this window. You can see by the instructions here the camera will reboot in a few seconds, and it'll take about a minute or so for the camera to come back at the home page here.
1 hour later.
Now that the camera's rebooted, I'm going to set my image up. This is just personal preference. These two drop-down boxes allow you to do several things within the camera. First, in the image size, I'm going to put it to a VGA, so I know I don't have any scroll bars on my screen to view the whole picture. I'm going to set the display mode to full image, and there I am there. One other thing I typically do is I start with the highest quality settings. So MOBOTIX has planted this high Q soft button here. If you press this, brings up a little menu, click store, and this is what's going to take place when I hit yes. Okay, so now we're starting at the best picture quality offered in this camera. I'm going to come down here to the setup menu, check a couple of these settings. Typically nothing needs to be changed in here. Factory default is fine. If you see this more button down here, a good idea to get into the habit of clicking that more button. You won't have to click it the second time. The browser will remember that you've done that already. Back button takes you back to the previous page. Usually go into the exposure settings. Again, factory is fine. One thing to be aware of down here is sometimes it will come with no artificial light. Well, if there's going to be artificial light in the scene of any of these cameras, you'll be better off putting it at the 60 Hertz, which is the North America frequency for high voltage electricity. So we'll set this to 60, hit set. We're not leaving the setup menu, so no need to hit close and OK yet. Just set is fine. You'll see the picture refresh. Hit the back button. Come down to text and display. Choose to leave MOBOTIX.com in there. We typically take that out because we're going to wind up putting something else in here specific to that camera, like the camera name. Click set. Back to the previous page. Typically the event settings, there's really nothing to do in there. Typically we're not arming the camera yet. Again, factory default is fine for a lot of these windows until you get into the nitty-gritty of configuring the separate cameras. Footnote here, what I'm basically doing is setting up this camera as a baseline for all the other cameras. So I'm having in my mind, again, setting this camera up so I can push this configuration to all the other cameras, and they all have a base setting at that point. And then going into the individual cameras for a particular configuration, depending on where that camera is going to be located and what it's used for. So again, this is just the base settings that I'm changing at this point, that I can push out to the other cameras and know that they're going to stick with that base setting. Other than that, we're good to go. This is a base level setup. So we're going to come back into one of these pages, hit set, close, and then always be sure to hit OK if you want to save that configuration. If you browse away from the page, some of those settings may not be saved. So hit OK. It's going to take us back to the home page. At this point, I'm going to go into the admin menu at this point. I'm just going to, again, having in my mind baseline items that I know I can push to other cameras and they won't necessarily need to be changed. Okay. Some of these, of course, are specific to this camera. Network setup, for example. But let's say, again, if I'm going to be storing video at the same location for all these cameras, here's my more button. I can set this up where the primary target is. If it's a file server, say a NAS, the IP address of the NAS, the directory of the NAS, the username, the password, because again, all this can be pushed to other cameras. All this is a baseline and can be pushed to other cameras. I won't change any of that at this point, so I'll go back to the previous page. Scroll down. Again, having that base level configuration in mind, keeping that in mind. I'll come down to the date and time. And we know that this is going to be, again, base level across all cameras. If you're going to have time servers, which we highly recommend, if the camera can see the internet, there are free time servers out on the internet known as NTP time servers. So I can click that. This camera can see the internet. Pull.ntp.org is one free time server out on the internet. You can see it did connect to the internet. Another one might be time.nist.gov. Again, it can see the internet. I typically would choose two different ones in case one happened to be down. Once you're finished here, again, just click set. They'll go ping those servers again, and they're fine. And the green down here tells us that we are getting good time from those servers. Click the back button again to go back to the previous page. And at that point, we've got a base level setup, both in the setup menu and the admin menu. There's really nothing else to do at this point. So we're going to store. You notice that we've made some changes that require this button to be pressed because it's emboldened. So we'll hit store, store permanently. We don't have to reboot. We didn't make any changes that require a reboot. So we can hit the home button. That'll take us back to the home page at this point. We're going to go back into the admin menu and I'll show you how to push this initial configuration to your other cameras, one or many. So again, we open up the admin menu, scroll down to the bottom and you'll see a hyperlink, manage other cameras. Click that. This camera will go out and search for other cameras on that network. And again, by default, that's what comes up. There's several options in here. You can add a new camera manually, but again, this has a utility built in. We'll go out and search for other cameras. Click the OK button. Now it's searching the network for other cameras. You may sometimes have to hit up here and always allow pop-ups. We're going to do that. And you see it went out and found 5 other cameras on the network. By default, it highlights all of them. You can hit the set button. And here's your other cameras, the IP addresses. If you need to know more information about these, select all, puts a check. By default, this comes up. Get information about selected cameras. Click OK. It's going to go out and ping those other 5 cameras. You can see it reached them. It's waiting for replies. The reply comes back. Once we found the other cameras, we can now copy the configuration from this camera, our 192.168.1.71, which is the Q26, push it out to the other 5 cameras by doing this. Click the down arrow. Again, several things you can do here, but we're going to copy configuration to selected cameras. Click OK, and then decide what we want to push out to the other cameras or what we don't want to push out. It says here, select the parts of your configuration that you want to copy to other cameras. So whatever has a check mark in it is going to be pushed to all those other cameras you had highlighted in the previous page. Well, typically you'll do everything. And even if you do choose networking, you don't have to worry about it. They're each going to get their own IP address. So typically you can check all these. Come down to use my current authentication tokens. Typically you're going to wind up putting what you've just entered into this camera, admin, and then we could enter our password at this point. Pay attention to the instructions here. In order to administer other MOBOTIX cameras, you need to authenticate yourself. You can either choose the current authentication tokens or enter a different username and password. I'm not going to follow through here because I've already programmed my other cameras, but once you have these items loaded, you can click OK. This camera will then go find the other cameras. It'll push the configuration down to the other cameras, and then one by one, it'll reboot those cameras. And that's all there is to it, folks. You've got a baseline configuration in this camera, which was pushed to the other cameras, and then you can move on from there. Okay, everyone, that's a wrap for this tutorial on initial camera configuration. More videos will be available soon on both devices and application software. Thanks for watching, and remember to visit our website, MOBOTIX.com, where you'll find all kinds of helpful information, downloads, documents, and tools. Thanks again, guys.